to the voices of these mothers illuminates a complex and more nuanced picture of everyday life and highlights the interactions of material conditions and scientific advice literature that shape women's lives and the ideology of scientific motherhood. For many, scientific motherhood was the height of modernity. Especially during periods of high immigration, modern motherhood, scientific motherhood, became an important symbol of acculturation. As one sociologist found in interviews with adult children of immigrants in the 1930s and 1940s in the United States, and I quote, "The faith in modern medicine and the desire to become modern mothers was taken for granted, commonly accepted, and understood," close quote. One of the women she spoke with vividly recalled the contrast between her mother's way and the modern scientific way. In this period, physicians insisted that babies be fed on a strict schedule, either every 3 or every 4 hours. If her daughter awoke before her scheduled feeding time, the mother would let the baby cry. This behavior horrified her mother, but the woman explained that she would not feed her daughter before the scheduled time. Quote, "This is the way it had to be," she said. "If the doctor said every 4 hours, it was the right thing to do." In her eyes, the practice constituted perfect motherhood. Following doctors' directions served to separate her generation from previous immigrant generations. It made her American and modern. Despite the strong faith of many mothers in the power of modern medicine, not every woman around the world subscribed to scientific motherhood. Some, we know, simply ignored the whole issue. They didn't take their children to physicians. They could not or would not read the vast literature available to them. Many others were more accommodating. They believed in the benefits of scientific motherhood, but retained for themselves some decision-making in childcare. They, like Mrs. Johnson, respond to personal circumstances. For instance, I mentioned the popularity of a rigidly scheduled infant feeding. Okay, usually in the United States it was 6 a.m., 10 a.m., 2 p.m., 6 p.m., 10 p.m., and sometimes 2 a.m. Fine. Now, given her family situation, however, some women might switch these hours to better fit with other family routines, such as 7 a.m., 11 a.m., 3 p.m., 7 p.m., 11 p.m. Pacifiers, dummies. Another frequent accommodation that mothers would make to ease their lives. In the early to mid-20th century, pacifiers were universally condemned by physicians. Plunket nurses entering New Zealand homes would lecture clients they found using pacifiers. Yet many desperate mothers realized that sucking on a pacifier calmed their infants. Consequently, just before the Plunket nurse was due to visit their homes, these mothers would race around hiding all the pacifiers rather than confronting the nurse with a pacifier. Mothers respected and appreciated the help and instruction provided by Plunket nurses, but that didn't blind them to the fact that a pacifier could pacify an irritable baby. These mothers valued their physicians and their nurses, but these healthcare providers were not part of their everyday practice. They couldn't understand how useful a pacifier was, or how a slight readjustment of a schedule made life easier. Then there were other mothers, those who were affluent enough to have their own doctors, who accepted the critical importance of physician supervision, but who also recognized that not all physicians were the same. Consequently, they were willing to challenge their own physician if they found the practice of another they preferred. The most dramatic example of this is the rise of natural childbirth, the natural childbirth movement in the mid-20th century. As I mentioned, by the 1930s and 1940s in the North, typically women birthed in hospitals. There they were placed in a sterile environment, alone, without their friends, and frequently under anesthesia. Women who preferred different circumstances, most particularly who preferred to be awake during labor and delivery, were considered difficult patients. Yet there were a few doctors, such as Ferdinand Lamaze in France and Grantley Dick Reed in Britain, who championed what became known as prepared or natural childbirth. Despite some stark differences between their practices, they shared two important characteristics. First and foremost, they both have the distinction of a physician, the most important characteristic in scientific motherhood. Second, they both stress the importance of women's active, aware participation in the birth process. Dick Reed wrote a popular book which helped spread his ideas beyond Britain. Women from around the world wrote to him, again voluminous files of this correspondence, asking where they could find a local doctor who practiced the Dick Reed method and soliciting advice on how to persuade their physician to do likewise. Reading his book gave others the courage to challenge the medical system directly. With book in hand, committed women could confront doctors who talked down to them like uneducated patients. Such women sensed there was a problem with contemporary, highly medicalized childbirth, but they needed the validation of a medical practitioner to give them the confidence and the credibility to insist on what they believed they needed. In so doing, they modified hospital childbirth, but still within the parameters of scientific motherhood.